Can we have a question here from our Platonic dualism episode called Plato's Cage? And here we go. Lisa says, could you please explain 1 Peter 3:19 through 20, where some say that is Jesus preaching to the spirits in prison? Also, 1 Corinthians 15:29, where Paul asks, why do they then baptize for the dead if the dead rise not at all?
Yeah, those are great questions. And as we're getting started kind of answering through these, I'm gonna sort of weave into our answer here. Um, just I think it'd be good for us as we're doing this to just remember the historical and cultural backdrop to what's going on in the first century. Because the underlying answer to all of these things is we're combating a teaching called Gnosticism. Gnosticism really got that name and got really going in the second century. A lot of the early church, what we call early church fathers, were combating this teaching of Gnosticism. But before it got that name and got popularized by that name, um, it was the original sin from Genesis. That's exactly what started. The Lord told them not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Don't even touch it, because if you touch it, you're going to die. And
Hmm.
what he says in the Hebrew there has been so misunderstood. And I think really, I can't stress this enough. So many false teachings today and misunderstandings. I'm trying to be kind to those who don't understand this, because I don't think they're, heretics. And we use these big words like heretical. And although I do think that it's erroneous, I like to use that word. I don't think people have evil intentions, because I think they mean well. But if you go back, in fact, maybe we could just start there real quick for this answer,
Okay.
because I really think getting familiar with this is so, so, so important on so many levels. The ramifications for this are just gigantic. But let's go ahead and look specifically at what God said to Adam, and then we can look at what Satan said to Eve. This is really important. So as we're getting to the actual command of God in Genesis 2:15, we'll just start in 2:15. Then the Lord God took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend it and keep it, which, by the way, this is really getting to the plot line of the Bible. The Lord wants us to be in his garden. He wants us to produce fruit. We see this fruit bearing theme throughout the entire Bible. The garden here is representative of the character of God. Um, it really reflects his creativity, his creative power. You put a seed in the ground, it's seemingly dead, and then it bears fruit. And so we have a seed theme that produces something. Of course, we see that in Genesis 3:15, the production of Eve, the production of the serpent, and so forth. So this is so finely done throughout the literary theme that even if you remember, when Jesus resurrects, somebody mistakes him for a gardener. I mean, that's how tight this theme is through all the way through. And we see, of course, the tree of
Hmm.
life at the end of Revelation 22. So I mean, this is like the theme of the whole. This is the
I
plot line.
I just thought that was coincidental or something.
Yeah,
I have I
yeah,
literally
not at
have
all.
not I have not put one thought into that.
Yeah, that not at all. Yeah, he's the new Adam. He's tending to his garden. There's the
This
gardener. Well,
this
that's
is
that's
more this is more biblical typology, isn't it?
it is. Yeah, it really is. And
Wow.
and that's why typology is a lot of fun to study. It goes through. So he's going to tend to the garden and keep it. Genesis 2:16, he says, "Of every tree of the garden you may freely eat." And then here comes the verse we really need to look at, Genesis 2:17. He says, "But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day you eat it, you shall surely die." Now, this is the phrase that is really in question here. For in the day you eat of it, you shall surely die. Now, what is that saying? Well, I can unlock the mystery of this saying, but if you just stare at those words, let me just ask a question for our audience. And as you look at these words, answer the question based on the words here. What is sure? What is sure? What is certain the day they eat the fruit?
You will surely die.
So in one word, what is sure? What is certain the day you eat of it?
Death.
Death is sure the day you eat of it.
Hmm.
Now that's a lot different than saying the same day you eat of it, that same day you die.
Right.
That's a very different thing to say.
Yeah.
What he's saying in Genesis 2:17 is when you eat it, your death is certain. And when is your death certain? The day you eat of it.
Mm.
Now, let me show you in the Hebrew how you can know that's what it says. Really, a good translation of this in English would be this: the day you eat of it, dying, you shall die. What it means is you're going to be separated from the tree of life, and your process of death will begin the day you eat it. So your cells, as we all know, your cells are what's the word I'm looking for? They're remade every 7 years or so.
Regenerate.
Regenerate. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the word. Your cells regenerate every 7 years, but every time they come back, this is entropy, the second law of thermodynamics. They come back less organized, hence the aging process. So yes, my cells are rejuvenated, regenerated every 7 years, but they come back as a weaker version of themselves. And so, as that keeps on going on, finally, this regeneration doesn't keep up, and that's what the aging process is. And then finally, those are so weak they can't keep up. This would be the exact same thing if you take a piece of paper, super illustration, super easy illustration. Take a piece of paper, put it on a copy machine, and make a copy. But now take the master copy off the glass. Any of us who have done a copy machine knows exactly where I'm going with this illustration. Take the master off the glass, take the copy you made, put that on the glass, make one copy of that. Keep doing that where you just take that one copy and you throw away the master and you take the copy. You do that about 10 times and then compare the first with the second, or the first with the 10th, I should say, and keep on going. Now do that 100 times and look at every single imperfection is copied, and it always tends to disorder. You'll never get a clearer copy. You get a worse copy. Eventually, it'll be a black sheet of paper because all those little dots are being transferred to the next one.
Yeah, but I'm a little confused because I think Missy told me I get better every time the older I get.
Yeah, that's because she's lying to you.
Lie. Oh my goodness.
or
She
oh,
would
let,
not
let's be
lie to me. Would she lie
yeah,
to me?
let's be kind to Missy. Let's just say she's blinded by love.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably more of what
We'll
it
go with
is.
that.
Because
We'll
I
go
know
with that
Missy.
one.
Missy has upstanding character, so she doesn't. It's not a. It's not, it's not an on purpose lie. And that's like this idea of tending towards worse. This is called entropy,
Yeah.
and things tend towards disorder. They tend towards chaos. Your cells are replicating, but they're replicating as they lose information each time. Now let me look in the Greek. Let me show you this from the Greek so you can see this. And I'm taking my time here because I'm gonna expose Gnosticism here as we're doing this, and it really is the underlying thing here.
Okay.
So as you go through here, you can see on the left hand side, bud of the tree of the knowledge, and then you see the right hand. You see the Hebrew. Thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. Now look at here. This is what I want people to see. See this word right here? I see
Surely.
this word right here. Do you see that?
Yeah. Oh, that's the same word.
That is the same word. Now look over here. Surely die. Surely is emphasizing. So this really says, in the day you eat of it, you will die.
Okay. So it's for emphasis. Like if you scroll up to the phrase right above surely. See how it's
Hmm.
two words?
Yep. Yep.
Oh,
Exactly.
and it's the same word too.
You got it. You nailed
Wait a
it.
minute. Now
It
scroll
sure.
up to the next one.
Yeah.
What? Okay, so I guess they separated all those for emphasis. Why couldn't they have just
Hmm.
put "Thou shalt surely die," in one line, and then just with have
Hmm.
H4191?
Because do you see the way this is written in the Hebrew is it really means dying from a dying process, you will die eventually.
Hmm.
So from a dying process, a dying process will culminate and die in death.
Yeah.
Okay, if that makes sense at all. From
Yeah.
a dying process, you'll die in death. Something that's incomplete will become complete. So
Hmm.
I like to just simply say, dying, you will die. Okay, so that is the warning here. Now that we've got that under our belts, let's go ahead and go. So that's the warning. The warning is clear in Genesis 2:17 that if you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you in the day you eat of it, your death is sure. And
Hmm.
dying, you shall. So you could read it this way: for in the day you eat of it, you shall dying, or start the process of dying, you will die from that process of dying.
Hmm.
Why? Because you're separated from the tree of life. Okay, now look at what Satan says when he comes on the scene. By the way, the reason I went slow there is because the full preterist and others need for that to say that you will die that day. And they say, see, he didn't die that day. That means he died spiritually. Oh, what? It doesn't say that in the text.
Mm.
But if they get you to believe you're dying spiritually, then we can believe there's two different kinds of deaths and we redefine the rest of the Bible.
And resurrection becomes a spiritual thing and not a
That
physical
you
thing.
That's why I always say full preterism is hand in hand with Gnosticism. They say the physical body of Jesus doesn't matter if it resurrects. It's so important we understand that.
Okay.
Okay, so now look at Genesis 3:1. The serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field, which the Lord God has made. He said to the woman, has God indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? Now look at her response. And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, which, by the way, this part was not in the text. So maybe Adam said, don't even touch it. We're not sure, but there's added instruction there.
Don't even look at it. Don't even
Don't
look.
even go. Let's just not even go. It's kind of like when you tell your kids, hey guys, let's just not even go in that room. Like let's stay out of that room. Don't even touch it, lest you die. Now, here's Gnosticism. Here's every religious system on the planet other than Christianity. The serpent said to the woman, you shall not surely die. And that's the lie right there, Jimmy.
Hmm.
This is the lie that starts all of this idea of we have taken this to say that soul means something different and the soul can't die. You can't die. How many people preach from the pulpits? How many pastors say it's a matter of location? Everyone lives forever. Well,
Yeah.
that's not in the Bible.
Yeah.
But here's the first major lie, and Gnosticism is born out of this: you shall not surely die. But instead, what will happen is in Genesis 3:5. Here's what he's saying. Here's what will happen. For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened. You'll be like God, knowing good and evil. Okay? So Satan's saying, no, 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 no. It's not a death thing. It's actually a God thing. You're gonna have knowledge. You're gonna overcome the flesh, and you'll know what he knows. This is an idea of knowledge and being like him. Okay, so Gnosticism teaches that the God of the Old Testament is wicked. It actually is reversed. Satan is actually trying to free the person. Satan's trying to free the person. And the God of the Old Testament that we would read is a very cruel God. Um, and so when the Messiah comes on the scene, Gnosticism says that Jesus is empowered by the spirit of a different sort of good God that comes on him and leaves him.
Mm.
It's in him and then it's gone. And the times that it's in him, he is the Messiah. The times that it's not in him, he's just Jesus, Joe Schmo. Gnosticism says that that spirit was from another world trying to conquer the God of the Old Testament.
Mm.
Okay, so try to get all that in your head. That's Gnosticism, and it was by that name in the second century. But we've been seeing the elements of Gnosticism all the way from the garden. Now, let's go back to Genesis chapter 3, as God leaves no question what he meant in chapter 2. Of course, he tells the serpent here that he's going to be cursed, and here's the plot line of the Bible in 3:15. He says to the woman, she'll be in sorrow, and then finally he says to Adam, verse 17. Then he says to Adam, because you heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it. He's like, remember? Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. In other words, creation is not going to be on your side now. You're going to have to work for this thing.
Wait a minute, I thought he was going
Both
to die that day. So what does he mean all the days of your life?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. The thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. You shall eat the herb of the field. And then he clarifies, it says, in the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. That's the continuation of that process I talked about. You are going to return to the ground. Then he declares, for or because out of it, that is the ground, you were taken. For dust you are and dust you shall return. This is combating Gnosticism. Okay, so we talked about last time in Genesis 2:7 is the makeup of man. You
Hmm.
are body plus breath equals life, or body plus spirit equals soul. Soul just means a living being. That's all it means. So God clarifies what he's talking about in Genesis chapter 2. So let's just keep in mind as we're answering these questions that this has an underlying major part of our society called Gnosticism that we were fighting ever since the second. Well, really, we were fighting it in the days of the first century. This really was embraced by Plato. So Plato in Greek philosophy really embraced this teaching from Satan, saying, "No, you won't die. You'll know." And really, death is a blessing. And we hear Christians saying this today. Oh, I just want to die and just get out of this body so that I can be with the Lord. It's like, I know what they mean, but listen to what you're saying. Death is not the hero here.
Yeah.
Life is a gift from God. It is in life that we worship him and celebrate him. Now, we know that we'll be resurrected at the second coming. In that sense, there is some sort of a relief in death in that you can rest until his coming. But no, you don't get to whip yourself and say, I hate this physical body. See, the Gnostics think everything physical is evil and wicked, and everything that is spiritual is wholesome and good. They think the issue is not God versus godliness versus ungodliness. They think the issue is physical versus spiritual.
What wasn't there a guy in the first or second century? Was it Marcellus or
Marcellus? Hmm.
did he teach
Oh,
that
Marcion.
Marcion? Didn't he teach that because of what you just said, our bodies is just filth, so it doesn't even matter what you do
Yeah,
in your body
yeah, yeah. The
because you can just
Marcionites. Yeah,
you can do all the things in the flesh that you want to do, uh, but in your spirit, you believe in Jesus and they're
yeah.
just two different things. Was that him that said that?
I believe he was involved in Gnosticism. That's right.
Yeah.
But really, we really can't go past in between the Gospels or in between Malachi and Matthew, the Testaments, intertestamental period. Greek philosophy through Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, these guys picked up this and really made it Platonic anthropological dualism. And that's Gnosticism is just that repackaged. And that is Satan's message repackaged.
Hmm.
That you have a soul in you that is immaterial, that's the real you, the good you, and then you got this stinking flesh on the outside. It's weighing you down, and we can't wait to get out of the no, but the Bible teaches us that life is a gift, that our bodies are fearfully and wonderfully made. We don't have any example of anybody alive outside of their body. We need a body to live. And so in that time period, we have the pseudepigraphas written. The pseudepigrapha literally means pseudo is false, and pigrapha has the idea of writings. So you have this grouping of false writings, like the book of First Enoch. What is that? Well, First Enoch is basically a mashup of the Hebrew scriptures and Greek philosophy, which we would now know as Gnosticism.
Hmm.
If you took the Hebrew text and took Gnosticism and smash them together, you got the book of First Enoch. That's what the pseudepigrapha is. It wasn't Enoch that wrote it, folks.
Wow.
There was no book on the ark. Okay, that's not in the Bible. It's completely outside the Bible.
Well, could it have been like handed down verbal tellings and that
Yeah,
Noah remembered and wrote them
yeah,
down later?
yeah. It doesn't work because you can't harmonize the two. One, you have a total radically different view of who God is, You have so many problems wrong with that, but it's part of the pseudepigrapha. Anybody who's a serious historian has no problem saying that's a part of the pseudepigrapha. First thing, Enoch didn't write it. And so you have a liar that said they're Enoch. So that's how you're starting. But secondly, all the doctrines that are contained therein are not biblical ideas.
Mm.
And so what people do is they try to mash and harmonize the Bible with that. But that's what we're fighting here with this. So I don't mind answering questions. I love what we're about to do and answer these questions. But just keep in mind that for every one question I get asked, and they're always the same. I mean, that's why we're not going to have very many questions on this, because you have basically Philippians, Luke 16, 2 Corinthians 5:8. And every once in a while, somebody will mention 1 Peter 3. But other than that, there's really not that many texts we're going to have to deal with this. But on the other hand, you have hundreds or maybe even thousands of verses that they would have to deal with on my side, like the wages of sin are death. John 3:16. If you don't believe in him, you'll perish. Um, Revelation 20. This is the second death. I mean, these are the clear teachings of the text that no one ever has to deal with, but they think the minority, and I'm not saying the people that ask these questions, I'm just saying Christianity at large, they'll look at Luke 16 and say, oh, there it is, done deal, doctrine of hell, totally established. Like, whoa, man,
Yeah.
if that's true, you're overturning the the preponderance of the evidence. I mean, the preponderance of the evidence is what we should judge our doctrine by. The whole
Not
story.
well, not to mention, isn't that in the middle of 5 or 6 other parables
Yeah,
that
well,
Jesus was using all together to answer a question? And why would that one? I don't think anybody argues that the other 4 or 5 are parables, but yet this one would be real, right in the middle, a real true story.
that's right. It starts in Luke 15, and we'll get there after this one. But yeah, it's in a series of five. It's the fifth of five parables. And
Hmm.
Luke 15, I mean, it literally says, and he spoke these parables to them. I mean, it says that. And this is the same conversation. And so we'll show
Yeah.
that in just a moment. I
Okay.
just wanted to let everybody be aware that we're dealing with Gnosticism with this idea. So the idea of dying and immediately being present with the Lord, I know sounds maybe comforting, but remember the ramifications of that. It's not just that. Because if you say, well, I like the idea of dying and being in heaven, okay, first of all, we were never made for heaven. The Bible nowhere says we spend eternity in heaven. It says the meek will inherit the earth like a billion times. I mean, I'm exaggerating. Over and over and over again, the Bible is very clear that this earth is made for the godly, that the meek, the godly inherit the earth. Never says we spend eternity in heaven. So that's totally misread, and that we're not promised heaven. We're promised a renewed heaven and earth, so skies and ground. Okay, so just keep in mind what we're dealing with here, because Gnosticism is a very powerful idea, and it
Mm.
basically is the only competing idea. You can put everything in this category of Gnosticism: Hinduism, Buddhism, Mormonism, in my opinion, full preterism. Um, in a lot of ways, Catholicism. All of those go under the heading of Gnosticism. Some of them have mixed biblical Christianity in there. Of course, Catholicism and Mormonism would have a little bit of mixed Christianity in there. But you have a God to pray to, a God for travel mercies. Oh, don't forget to pray to Saint whatever for your travel mercies. Oh, Saint whatever is for this. They have these gods that have been elevated, that have died and been released from their body in this mysticism world of praying to this. You can't. You're going to talk to a dead person. The Bible says the dead don't know anything. So no, to be dead, you need to have a resurrection to be alive again. That's the biblical view.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go ahead and handle this in First Peter. Let's go ahead and head over to First Peter chapter 3. So what we are about to look at is we're about to look at the problems for my view. These would be problem texts for my view. These are things I have to work through for my view. They're not a home run for either side. But to isolate them and say this proves that the rest of the Bible. See, what you'd have to do, if you're saying that these verses are overturning what I'm saying, then all of a sudden you have to deal with for the wages of sin is death. Now that person has to deal with for the wages of sin is death. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
There is probably no biblical view you can take that is a total home run that nobody could ever challenge. I think no matter what position you take, there will be a blurry center column of difficult verses. It doesn't matter what you take. My position as a Bible teacher is I want to take the position that has the least amount of difficult verses to deal with. In other words, I want the whole of the Bible from Genesis 1 to Revelation 22 to flow as seamlessly as possible, and you're going to have to make some choices and make your position based on that. In that, you're going to have some that are difficult to interpret.
Hmm.
Everybody's giving me right now the difficulty of my position. But remember, if you don't like my answer on these, what you're forced to do is take all the clear passages which say that the ungodly burn up like chaff, that they will not be. You'll have to deal with those verses if you think that I'm wrong in this. See,
Yeah.
so I have the easy job here, but let me flip it around and say, now you explain John 3:16 to me. Because you know what they're gonna have to do? Well, death doesn't really mean death. Death means eternal separation from God. Where's that in the text? You see, so there's no home run here. I think my side's a home run in the sense that I only have 5 or 6 to teach, and I'm letting the rest of the Bible inform my decisions on these, guide me. But if you go into this thing with blinders and you're seeing this as a bullet points and saying, well, what about First Peter 3? And that's all you're dealing with? Okay, maybe it's 50-50 and maybe Ken's not right on this. But let's go ahead and read it. I'll give you my best answer here. But if you don't like my answer, then you have to deal with John 3:16. I don't mean you, Jimmy, but I'm pointing at you. I don't mean you personally, but
Yeah.
those that would
Well, I'm
disagree.
like, what I
Yeah.
do?
Yeah, yeah. So there's two sides to this thing. You got to make sure you deal with the whole thing. So let's go ahead and answer the question in First Peter, Jimmy. So really the question is about First Peter chapter 3, but let me just say this as we're getting into it. Starting with chapter 1, Peter is trying to encourage those that are in the Roman Empire for suffering for Christ. And he's saying that the Spirit of God will be with them. Here's the question that we were asked, starting in Peter chapter 3 verse. I'll start at verse 18. Really, the questioner was asking about 19 and 20, but if you'll notice, this is all one sentence. So I'm going to start at 18. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive by the Spirit. By whom, okay, this is why I wanted to read the first one. By whom is referring back to Spirit. So this 19 and 20 is really talking about the power of the Spirit. See, Jesus died, but he was resurrected by his Spirit. Notice there, this is the same way Adam was created. See, when you're right about something, it should work everywhere. When Adam was created, the Spirit of God entered into him and made him a living being, made him alive, he was made a living soul. He didn't receive a soul because a soul's not a thing to receive. He was made alive. Soul means life. He was made alive. And here, in the same sense, Jesus was dead. He was so dead. You say, how dead was he? Jesus was so dead that if the Spirit of God didn't raise him, he'd still be dead. He wasn't put into another room. He didn't go down to hell and do something. He was dead, dead, as in he needed a spirit to enter into him again from God to be made alive. See? But he was made alive by the Spirit. He didn't just decide to have his soul re enter his body and walk out of the tomb. No, he was made alive by the Spirit. And what he's saying in verse 19 is by whom? By whom? Who's that referring to? By the Spirit of God, by whom he, okay, who's the he? The he is Christ. So he's saying here, it's the Spirit of God that allowed Christ. He went and preached to the spirits in prison. Okay, that's really interesting. Spirit means breath, but it can also, in its different shades of meaning, have the idea of people and their animated part of them that connect with God. And then he says, who formerly were disobedient. Okay, so these spirits were formerly in past times disobedient. When once the divine long suffering waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared. So these that were disobedient were being preached by Jesus through the Spirit in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which A few, that's 8, that's Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, their wives, were saved through water. Okay, question. How did Jesus preach to spirits who are currently in prison? They're in prison in the days of Noah. Jesus was born in the first century, and here we're talking about the great flood. How? Well, again, like any answer we give, they're always answered by starting at the beginning and reading slow. First Peter chapter 1 gives us the answer. So we would know this if we started at the beginning, but most that teach Gnosticism or teach anthropological dualism, they take things in bullet points. They don't read in context. But here's what we learn. We learn in First Peter chapter 1 that there's this idea of a spirit of Christ. I want to show you this in First Peter. By the way, look at the context. This is the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Okay. So this is the context of this idea of the suffering, where we suffer with the idea of Jesus being resurrected from the dead. But look at what he says in verse number 10. Of this salvation, look who it is, the prophets, that's referring to Old Testament prophets, have inquired and searched carefully. So the prophets were looking for this salvation that we now receive on this side of the cross. They prophesied of the grace that would come to you. In other words, first century reader, the prophets of the Old Testament searched carefully for the grace that we have through Jesus of his resurrection. Now, check this out. They were searching what manner of time. They were wondering, when will this happen? When will what happen? The Spirit of Christ who was in them. What? The Spirit of Christ was in the prophets of the Old Testament. Super
Mm.
important to understand. The Spirit of Christ who was in them was indicating, when he testified beforehand, the sufferings of Christ, the glories that would follow. To them, to who? To the prophets of the Old Testament, it was revealed that not to themselves, but to us, they were ministering the things which now have been reported to you through those who have preached the gospel to you by the Holy Spirit sent from heaven, things which angels desire to look. Okay, so now let's go back and understand this. First Peter chapter 3, going back to our original question. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, being made alive in the spirit, by whom also he, that's Christ, went and preached to spirits who are now in prison, to the spirits in prison currently. They're currently in prison, Peter's saying, but they were formerly disobedient. So how do we get Christ preaching to them? Because Noah was a preacher of righteousness. Noah, in other words, let me say it very plainly. Noah was preaching through the Spirit of Christ in his days to the ungodly. So through Noah, the Spirit of Christ was preaching to the ungodly. Where are they now? Well, they've died and they're waiting the resurrection to be judged and then sentenced for their sin. It tells us right here, there's also an antitype, or an antitype, how we'd say that, which now saves us. Baptism. So now we have this word antitype. We have type and antitype, shadows and substance. Let me show you a very interesting thing that this is unique to Peter. In Second Peter chapter 2, check this out. For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell, delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment. There's a good video for us. But really, for this video, look at verse 5. And did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, same author, we're still reading Peter, one of 8 people, a preacher, a preacher, a preacher of righteousness. Unique to Peter, Peter calls Noah a preacher of righteousness. That's unique to Peter. You don't read that phrase anywhere else. So how does this work in First Peter chapter 3? Here's my take. I believed that Christ First, chapter 1, through his spirit, used Noah to preach to those in his day about those that are being disobedient. Where are they now? They're in prison currently in the first century. Their spirits are in prison. Why? Because they're dead and they're waiting for the resurrection of the dead to be judged and then sentenced. That's my take on an extremely controversial passage. Is it a home run for my side? No, not by a long shot. But I do think that's what he's saying. But I will tell you this, I will tell you what this does not teach. This does not teach that after you die, you are present with the Lord or burning in hell. It doesn't say that. I can promise you that. It's a long shot from that. But I think that I've shown that chapter 1 says that the Spirit of Christ was in the prophets of old. I've established that in chapter 1. I
Hmm.
also established that it was the Spirit of Christ in the prophets of old that were looking for the salvation and they were telling men about it. Then I established in chapter 3 that Noah, it was in the days of Noah when this was happening, and they were formerly in past tense, disobedient, but their spirits are right now currently in prison. Now, how did Christ do that? His spirit used Noah, Second Peter chapter 2, the preacher of righteousness, to warn them to get into the boat, but there was only 8 that obeyed. That's my understanding of this very, very confusing and highly debated passage, which I don't think is a home run for anybody. But I'm saying this is probably one of the most difficult for my position, and I think I think that's a better biblical answer than isolating it as a bullet point and saying, "See, people go to heaven when they die," or "See, people burn in hell when they die."
Yeah.
It definitely doesn't say that. So anyway, that's my understanding. That would be my answer of First Peter chapter 3. No doubt it's confusing for all sides, but that's my understanding of it.
Okay, and then Ken, the second part of her question was about 1 Corinthians 15:29, where Paul asked, "Why do they then baptize for the dead if the dead rise not up at all?"
Yeah, and so in First Corinthians chapter 15, Paul is talking about the whole passage is a resurrection chapter. And Paul is dealing with the reality of the bodily resurrection of Christ. And now you see why I'm so passionate about the bodily resurrection of Christ, because it's combating, again, dualism. In fact, he says in this chapter, for those that are asleep in Christ, if Christ be not risen from the dead, they are already perished. In other words, what he's saying is they're not in limbo in heaven going, what are we supposed to do here? Jesus hasn't resurrected. No, it's like if Jesus didn't resurrect, even if you call on his name, you're dead. You're dead as a doornail. You're perished. That's the word perished, is sleeping, which is a euphemism for death, without an anticipation of a resurrection. Dead. You're dead. In the words of Genesis chapter 2, dead. So he's talking to people who are trying to disprove him, and they're using ideas from those who don't believe in a resurrection. Okay, so you have the Pharisees are one major group, and then the Sadducees are another. And I'll just use them as an example. There were more groups that didn't believe in a resurrection, but the Sadducees did not believe in a resurrection. Okay, having all of that in mind, what Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians 15:29 is he is simply saying, he's saying, if there is no resurrection of Christ, he says in verse 29, otherwise, what will they do who are baptized for the dead if the dead do not rise at all? Why then are they baptized for the dead? Now, I want you to notice very carefully what is not being said. What Paul is not saying is, you should baptize for the dead. Okay, he's not saying that. What he's saying is that their argument is there's no future resurrection. And Paul is saying, even in your own documents, you guys baptize for the dead. Why do you do that? If there's no future resurrection, why are you baptizing for the dead?
Oh, okay. So he's calling them out on
He's
some of their hypocrisy. Would it be hypocrisy? Or
it just yeah, it's nonsensical. I mean, if you're
yeah.
baptizing for the dead and they're never gonna not be dead, then why do you do that? So he's calling them out on their own practice, saying you
Hmm.
must believe in some kind of a life after death. Don't you guys baptize for the dead? Otherwise, why are you doing that? He's trying to crack he's trying to crack their understanding that you guys do believe in a resurrection. He's not teaching baptism for the dead. So that one's pretty easy. That's what he's talking about on that one.